Okay. At the end of the last lesson, we took a look at the unfulfilled phase of our Founder-Acharya's movement, the demonstration of a spiritually classless society through the development of Daiva Varnashram communities, living the way Krishna lives. In a natural village setting, such communities would offer us and the world a practical vision of how Krishna culture works on earth. The Lord's positive alternative to the suffering and impersonalism imposed by misdirected modern civilization. Yet, since many of us were born and raised in Kali's cities and suburbs, we may find ourselves neither ready, willing, nor able to follow Srila Prabhupada into the Varnashram frontier. And we may wonder what our place is in our Founder-Acharya's greater mission to re-spiritualize humanity. In this lesson, we'll take a look at how to find our natural place in our Founder-Acharya's worldwide movement, and also how to see the Lord through service to his confidential servant, our foundational spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada. There we have in the image accompanying the title slide of the lesson, Srila Prabhupada in deep japa meditation at Bhaktivedanta Manor in the summer of 1973. Finding our mission in his mission is really about finding mentors, well-wishers, guides, senior devotees who can help us develop our unique contribution to the Hare Krishna movement. First, we're going to take a look at the importance of doing our own duty. The Bhagavad Gita, Shankaracharya once called the Gita the quintessential of essentials. Of literally billions of verses in the Vedas, the Bhagavad Gita in just 700 verses captures the essence of the entire Vedic message. It is Veda concentrate, as Krishna puts it in the 15th chapter of the Gita, Vedaischa sarvair aham eva vedya. By all the Vedas, it's he, Krishna, who is to be known. Now, in that 700-verse Bhagavad Gita, only twice does Krishna repeat himself in two pair of verses. So it's rare that Krishna does that. He repeats the first full Sanskrit line in only two pair of verses. Now, one of those pair, as you can see by the slide here, has to do with duty. The first verse in the pair about duty comes up in the 3rd chapter of the Gita. Here's how it looks in English. Quote, "It is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though faultily, than another's duties perfectly. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duties, for to follow another's path is dangerous." That's how Krishna ends the verse. Now, in the 2nd verse of the pair, it's not until the 18th chapter, and in 1847, Krishna repeats the same first line. It's Shreyan Swadharma Vigunat Paradharma Swadushtita. Same idea. It's better to do your own duty. And here's how Prabhupada translates Krishna in 1847. Quote, "It is better to engage in one's own occupation, even though one may perform it imperfectly, than to accept another's occupation and perform it perfectly." And now Krishna ends the verse a little differently. duties prescribed according to one's nature are never affected by sinful reactions. In 335 it was, if you try to do somebody else's duty, it's dangerous. Here, if you do your own duty, there's no karma, because it's not self-centered, it's Krishna-centered. And this is addressing Arjuna's main reason of not wanting to fight. He felt it was very simple. As Krishna says, if you do it according to your own nature, it's not affected by sinful reactions. Now there's only one other pair of verses in the Gita where Krishna repeats the first full Sanskrit line. And that has to do with thinking of him. Manmana bhava bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. That comes up in chapter 9, text 34, practically almost the mathematical center of the Gita, where Krishna says, engage your mind always in thinking of me, offer obeisances, worship me. And then he says, being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. This comes up again in 1865, same first full Sanskrit line. Manmana bhavamad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. Think of me, Krishna is saying. Now think about this. In terms of emphasis, in the Bhagavad Gita, the Gita is summing up all the verses in the Vedic literature. Krishna is putting duty, at least in terms of emphasis, on an equal par with thinking of him, which is really the goal of life. Thinking of Krishna, especially at the time of death, is the perfection of life. So when we do the seminar live, I ask the students, why does the Gita give duty equal emphasis to thinking of Krishna, which is the goal of life? And after some discussion, we arrive at the answer. It's because our duty is the way we express our bhakti, which Srila Prabhupada translated as devotional service. Not just love, not just devotion, devotional service. Our duty is our opportunity to express our bhakti. Now, in every age, we're born ignorant, but especially in the Kali age, we often have difficulty knowing who we are and what our duty is. So, next lesson, you see a couple of images there from Western culture. On the top left, we have a famous painting done in the 18th century about the death of Socrates, who was really the Western philosopher that Srila Prabhupada liked the most, because he wasn't afraid to die for his realizations, his convictions. And that conviction was, I'm not this body. Socrates, if you know his history, had the gall, had the audacity to preach the immortality of the soul, which was somehow considered heresy back in Hellenistic Greece. So for this heresy, Socrates was condemned to death. And in this famous 18th century painting, he's being cheerfully given the fatal cup of hemlock. And then there's a friend of Socrates at his knee there. He's been trying to convince Socrates to escape, because they can help him escape. But Socrates has no interest in it, because he knows he's not the body. There in the words, if you can make out the words in the image, two famous lines from Socrates. The first one says, know thyself. And then, the unexamined life is not worth living. So Socrates is really all about self-realization. So as he's about to take the hemlock, Crito, who's at Socrates' knee there, famously says, how should we bury you? That was the question reported later, that he said he asked Socrates, how should we bury you? And Socrates famously replied, however you want to. if you can actually catch me, and if I don't escape you. In other words, he knows he's not his body. You can do what you want with this body, but as we say nowadays, I'm out of here. So Prabhupada praised Socrates for realizing he wasn't his body. So he took the cup from his disciple's hand. The story goes that he drank the hemlock, lay down, and then the hemlock supposedly started working from the feet up. So he lost feeling in his feet. First his feet became numb, which he was reporting. He was supposedly reported it. Now my feet are numb, now my legs are numb, now my waist is numb. And then finally, when the poison reached his heart, he stopped speaking and he was gone. So that's Socrates. Now that was, as you can make out the dates there, 469 to 399 BC. So some 70 years. Now fast forward from that time, almost 2,000 years to Shakespeare's time. Now Shakespeare also, in his famous play Hamlet, has a character named Polonius say to his son Laertes a line which has since become very famous: "This above all, to thine own self be true." Now in the context of the play, Polonius is moralizing to his son Laertes. Polonius was a famous moralizer. He loved to hear himself speak. He was pretty full of himself, and he thought himself very wise and witty. But what Polonius means by self in the context of the play is something like one's worldly self-interest. It wasn't about the Atma that Socrates was quite aware of and proved it by fearlessly drinking the hemlock. It was a kind of worldly self-interest. So that was a significant downgrade from what Socrates meant by self. And that was, 500 years ago, Shakespeare's time, Lord Chaitanya's time. Now, contrast that to the further downgrade of standing in a checkout line today, for example, in a modern American supermarket, where there's a good chance you may see on the magazine rack, there's a magazine in America called Self, big, bold, capital letters, S-E-L-F. But invariably on the cover of Self, you'll just see somebody, who's showing off their body, usually a lady. And very often it's all about having a thin waist and a nice tight abdomen like that. So that's the concept of self. Nowadays, it's really about the dense, gross body. So the question, I scroll below now. In Kali Yuga, why is it so difficult to know who we are and what our duty is? Who we are, what is the self, and what our duty is. Now, when we go to the next slide, same images, but you're going to hear Srila Prabhupada answer this question. The question wasn't put to him like this, but you're going to hear Srila Prabhupada speaking to the World Health Organization in Geneva in 1974. He's addressing WHO, WHO, the World Health Organization. And I want you to think how Srila Prabhupada is answering this question. In Kali Yuga, why is it so difficult to know who we are and what our duty is? Okay, here is His Divine Grace, and I'll give the sound to the speaker.
The Vedic civilization is Varnashram Dharma. If the Varnashram Dharma is not properly protected, then there will be population who are called Varna Sankara, mixed population.
Okay, Varna Sankara, mixed population. In other words, in Kali Yuga, because there's no more samskaras followed, and as one social philosopher observes, many people are born out of a bottle of beer on Saturday night. In Kali Yuga, we're all more or less Varna Samkara, mixed caste. In a word, all mixed up. There's no more pure lines of Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, like that. So we find in ourselves very often in Kali Yuga strongly conflicted tendencies toward work. The gunas are really strongly competing for our attention in a very often chaotic way. Small wonder then that professions like occupational therapy are now a growth industry. So to understand who we are and what our duty is, we Kali Yugans, citizens of Kali Yuga, disconnected from a varnashram culture of self-realization, need help. And the first help an authentic spiritual culture provides is good parents. Let's take a look. There's a nice slide of a Vaishnavi mother reading about Krishna to her child. As you can see, I pulled it off the Desire Tree. To determine our prescribed duty, we need help. And now we'll see a famous quote by Lord Rishabdev to identify our first helpers, our parents, on our journey to understanding our mission for Krishna. Here's the heavy quote from Lord Rishabdev. One who cannot deliver his dependents from the path of repeated birth and death should never become a spiritual master, a father, a husband, a mother, or a worshipable demigod. In other words, if you're any kind of leader with followers, with dependents, with wards, with a charge, you should be concerned about seeing to their progressive march toward overcoming birth and death. It starts right in the home with Guru Ma, the mother. The mother is the first guru. We say mother tongue. We learn language from our first guru, our mother. Here's a corroborative reference to this Lord Rishabdev quote from Srila Prabhupada in a letter to a mother, a devotee mother in 1972. Quote, "These children are given to us by Krishna. They are Vaishnavas, and we must be very careful to protect them. These are not ordinary children. They are Vaikuntha children, and we are very fortunate we can give them chance to advance further in Krishna consciousness. That is very great responsibility." Okay, that's the first help we need. We don't often get it in a materialistic time and society, but that is Chris's arrangement, the first help, good parents. Now, besides good parents, we also need good teachers, and we need good spiritual masters. Let's take a look. There's Narada Muni with Dhruva Maharaj. And if you remember the Leela from the 4th canto, Dhruva Maharaj is only a 5-year-old boy, but he's been severely insulted by his stepmother, Suruchi. Suruchi is not his mother. She's his stepmother. His natural mother is Suniti. And Suniti and Suruchi are co-wives of the king, Maharaj Uttanapad. So Suruchi one day sees Dhruva playing on the lap of the king and pushes him off and insults him. "You cannot sit on the lap of the king unless you become fortunate and someday take birth from my womb. I'm the favorite queen." So Dhruva, he's a pedigree, heavy-duty, thoroughbred Kshatriya. He's only 5 years old, but he's got Kshatriya spirit. So he's severely insulted. He's crying, he's furious. He goes to his mother, Suniti, with his grievance. And Suniti, who's a humble lady, said, well, actually, Dhruva, Suruchi's right. I'm not the favorite queen, so I can't really, as we would say, lobby for you. I can't advocate for you. I can't help you. The only person who can really help you is God, and the sages, they say they find God in the forest. So maybe you'll have to look for God. So, as you may remember from the Leela, Dhruva goes to the forest, and there he meets Narada Muni. Let's look at a quote, one of the first quotes from Narada Muni. Narada to Dhruva. He's preaching to Dhruva. First of all, he says, Dhruva, what are you doing here? You're just 5 years old. And then Dhruva says he wants to see God, and Narada says, well, you're only 5 years old, and I know you're going through a difficult situation here, but maybe you should return to your mother. And furthermore, he says this, one should try to keep himself satisfied in any condition of life, whether distress or happiness, which is offered by the Supreme Will. A person who endures in this way is able to cross over the darkness of nescience very easily. So Narada has taken this tack with Dhruva. He tries to preach to him philosophically. Here's one of Dhruva's responses. Quote, my dear Lord, I am very impudent for not accepting your instructions. But this is not my fault. It is due to my having been born in a Kshatriya family. Therefore, your valuable instruction does not stand in my heart. Now, in his purport to this verse, Srila Prabhupada, he says some very significant things about the duty of the teacher or spiritual master knowing the real nature of his student. Let's see what Prabhupada says here. Quote, Dhruva Maharaj indirectly informed the great sage Narada that there are 4 kinds of human spirit. Interesting. Prabhupada uses the word spirit there. Usually when we hear spirit, we think of spirit soul. But Prabhupada here is meaning nature, human nature. 4 kinds of human spirit. The Brahminical spirit, the Kshatriya spirit, the Vaishya spirit, and the Shudra spirit. The spirit of one caste is not applicable to the members of another. The philosophical spirit enunciated by Narada Muni might have been suitable for a Brahmana spirit, but it was not suitable for a Kshatriya. Dhruva frankly admitted that he was lacking in Brahminical humility and was therefore unable to accept the philosophy of Narada Muni. Unless a child is trained according to his tendency, there is no possibility of his developing his particular spirit. It was the duty of the spiritual master or teacher to observe the psychological movement of a particular boy and thus train him in a particular occupational duty. What we're going to hear, Prabhus, in the next slide is Srila Prabhupada really driving home this point in the modern era. He's lecturing, let's see, where is Prabhupada? I'm not sure. We'll find out at the end. But he's saying the same thing that he's written in the Bhagavatam, but in a very forceful way. And I'll get off the headphones and let you hear it and plug in the speaker. Hang on.
The spiritual master will say that you work like this. That is natural. That's why in school, college, somebody is being trained up as a scientist, somebody is trained up as an engineer, as a medical man, as a lawyer. They are according to the tendency, practical psychology. of the student, he is advised that you take this line. So, by the instruction of the Guru, the real purpose is Krishna consciousness, and according to his guna and karma, he is engaged in a particular occupational duty.
So important that the spiritual master is able to discern the spirit or the nature of the disciple. So since spiritual masters play such crucial roles in helping us find our mission, in Prabhupada's mission, let's now look at how to select our spiritual masters. And okay, one more audio on this point. Here we go, hang on.
Therefore nobody should accept blindly any guru, and nobody should blindly accept any desire. They must behave one another at least for 1 year. This is the instruction by Sanatana Goswami in his Hari Bhakti Vilas.
Prabhupada referring there to Lord Chaitanya instructing Sanatana Goswami about guru-disciple relationship. Here's how it sounds in a CC reference. Lord Chaitanya is saying to Sanatana Goswami, your book, Sanatana, should describe the characteristics of the bona fide guru and the bona fide disciple. Then before accepting a spiritual master, one can be assured of the spiritual master's position. Similarly, the spiritual master can also be assured of the disciple's position. So notice the intense mutual examination. When Prabhupada said in that audio, they must behave one another, it wasn't quite the exact English word he meant. He meant to say examine, inspect, we would say check out. That's the idea. So the mutual examination. That was a quote in February in Miami. I was there for that lecture. So was Narahari Prabhu in the audience today. I don't remember Prabhupada saying that, but thank God we have recordings. Now in Hawaii, in the 21st January 1974, Prabhupada said something very similar. Quote, in Hari Bhakti Vilas by Sanatana Goswami, it is directed that the spiritual master and the disciple must meet together at least for 1 year, so that the disciple may also understand that here is a person whom I can accept as my guru. And the guru also can see that here is a person who is fit for becoming my disciple. Then the business is nice. And in this last spoken reference I will offer to you, Srila Prabhupada compares the care with which one selects a spiritual master to the care one must exercise in selecting a spouse. This is just a little quote, and it's actually the first recorded Gita lecture that we have. Even before Prabhupada, the 26th 2nd Avenue, he's on the Bowery. Even then he was recording his lectures. This is the 2nd of March, 1966. Prabhupada says, quote, acceptance of spiritual master must be selected, you see, after careful examination, just like one selects his bride or bridegroom after careful examination. Now, even before the mutual examination process, say today in ISKCON, it's important that senior devotees help ground the candidate, the new person, in the life teachings, mood, and mission of our foundational spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada. The last time I was visiting Dubai, I think it was 2012, and I taught the seminar for the second time, but it was only to the Bhakti Vriksha leaders, the leaders who introduce new people to Krishna consciousness in these little groups. They call them Bhakti Vriksha groups. So I asked the leaders, before I started the seminar, I said, how do you introduce people to Krishna consciousness in Dubai, which is a Muslim country, although there are many Indian people working in Dubai? How do you introduce them? And that's all they're allowed to approach, by the way, just the Indian community. Then they're fine. They won't get in trouble with the Muslim government. So the Bhakti Vriksha leader said, oh, Prabhu, first we introduced them to the aspiring stage. Aspiring. I said, aspiring? You mean aspiring to take initiation? Yes, Prabhuji. I said, wait a minute. Let's back up here. Before we start aspiring, let's ground everyone in the foundational stage, in their foundational spiritual master, in their Founder-Acarya, his life, his teaching, his mood, his mission. So they were shaking their heads yes, as is kind of the cultural way for Indian ancestry people. But I could tell they weren't really buying it or understanding it. By the end of the seminar, they got it. Because I was telling them, look, if you prematurely have these people aspiring, they will very soon be perspiring, and someday, not too long, they will be expiring. First, you have to ground them in their foundational spiritual master, the Founder-Acarya. And they got it. They finally got it. Oh, thank you, Prabhuji. Now we understand. Before the aspiring stage, we need the foundational stage. So this should go on even before people start aspiring, even before there's this mutual examination process. And this is the responsibility of the senior devotees, to ground the new person in the life teachings, mood and mission of Srila Prabhupada. Such grounding will enable the candidate to aspire with a cool head. Who will best guide and engage me in Srila Prabhupada's mission? To help our prospective spiritual masters know how to engage us in Srila Prabhupada's mission, we need to be educated and trained. We need to be honest and introspective. This should be the basic training. Basic training is, first of all, everyone gets to know, should learn what it means to be a devotee. How a devotee, how we in our original state think, how we feel, how we behave toward Krishna and all his devotees. And while we're doing this, if we're fortunate to have good mentors, good seniors doing this, we'll learn how to be thoughtful and introspective, which is the next slide. We heard Socrates say earlier, know thyself. The unexamined life is not worth living. Now, in Krishna consciousness, we learn that the self is none other than a part and parcel of the Supreme Self. As Krishna puts it in Gita 4:35, and when you have thus learned the truth, you will know that all living beings are but part of me, they are in me and are mine. We're not the whole, we're the part. We're not the master, we're the servant. As Prabhupada would put it, God realization and self-realization go hand in hand. So know thyself for Krishna. So now when we do the seminar live, I put the students through a little exercise on the next slide. First of all, I start with a quote, one of my favorites from the fourth canto. Quote, a devotee is as thoughtful as a non-devotee is speculative. And then I ask them, Prabhu, what's the difference between being thoughtful and being speculative? And where it all ends up is that when we're thoughtful, the mind is thinking in terms of Guru, Sadhu, Shastra, and seeing through Krishna's eyes, seeing through the eyes of Shastra. And speculative means we're just seeing phenomena before our senses. We're experiencing phenomena, our eyes, our ears, our tongue, but we're not even really clear on what it is or where it comes from. Srila Prabhupada himself gave the example in connection with the taste of water. Prabhupada said, if we taste water and then we think of Krishna's directive, I am the taste of water, then to think over in our minds how Krishna is the taste of water. Prabhupada says that's philosophical speculation. That's okay. That's a good kind of speculation. We mull over in our minds. We appreciate. We consider how Krishna is the taste of water. The mental speculation way is that we simply taste water. We just dive in with the senses, to the sense objects, and then we try to speculate with our minds what that is, that taste of water. And inevitably, by that empirical approach, we come up with something impersonal or void, such as the way of the Jnani or even the modern-day scientists. So a devotee is as thoughtful as a non-devotee is speculative. In both cases, the mind is being used, but thoughtful, the mind is grounded in Shastra, in the holy name, in Guru Sadhu, and non-devotee, it's not grounded in anything. It's kind of like when you blow up a balloon and then you have to let the air out really fast. It just goes all over the universe, willy-nilly, helter-skelter. So that we don't want. So then I say to the devotees, try this introspective exercise. Ask yourself, and then I ask them a bunch of questions. What 5 things do I care about most? And I tell them, don't think about it too much. Think about it later, but just write down 5 things. Just write from first thoughts. Don't edit, don't cross out, don't go back. Just the 5 things that come immediately to mind. What do I care about most? Write on impulse, but then reflect later. Next question. If I had all the money I needed, what would I do? That's very often our complaint, right? Oh, I would love to do that. I don't have the money. Next question. Whoops. Okay. If I knew I had 6 months to live, what would I do? That's another constraint on us in the material world, time. Oh, I'd love to do that. I just don't have the time. Maybe later. But the question is, if I knew I had 6 months to live, what would I really do? Next, doing which service do I most forget time? We all have our trance of activity, and then I always make a joke. I don't mean eating, sleeping, mating, and defending Prabhus. We're all very good at that. I'm talking about a specific service. Be as specific as you can. And we all have them. You know, things we do that they're just so much us. They're really our swadharma, our swakarma, our swabhav. It's really what we're meant to do. And it's a big clue of finding our mission in his mission. Most forget time. And finally, if I knew Krishna would help me succeed, what service would I dare to do? So finding our mission in his mission really is a life's work, and it does evolve as we go through different stages of life. The student stage, the family stage, the retired stage, the renounced stage. But at every step, we have to be thoughtful, so we can really, at every stage, make our best contribution to Prabhupada's mission with the help of people who really are our well-wishers, who want to see us grow closer to Krishna spiritually. And now, a reminder, to bring it all home, that our Founder-Acarya is our foundational guide for finding our mission in his mission. We always have to be in touch with Srila Prabhupada's amazing Vani, his everlastingly manifest spoken word and written word. There's Srila Prabhupada. He's laying the cornerstone for the foundation to the Bhaktivedanta Swami Gurukula in 1975 in Vrindavan. In April on Ram Navami, he installed Krishna Balaram, and now He's installing the cornerstone for the Gurukula. So he's, was, and always will be in ISKCON, as long as there's an ISKCON, our foundational guide. All gurus and disciples are dependent on their Founder-Acharya, as a building is dependent on its foundation. As neglecting the foundation eventually collapses a building, so neglecting our Founder-Acharya, his life, teachings, mood, and mission, eventually collapses guru-disciple relationships with, as history has shown, devastating consequences. So to learn from our society's past mistakes, all gurus and disciples must be absorbed in our Founder-Acharyas, again, the mantra, life, teachings, mood, and mission. Absorbing ourselves in our Founder-Acharya's mission with the intent to serve cooperatively is the best way to connect and grow with spiritual masters who can help us find our mission in his mission. Now, as the lesson's final slide will remind us, Srila Prabhupada's mission is really to engage everyone from all walks of life in devotional service to Krishna. What we're going to see over the next few slides is a quote from a famous purport, I think it's 1532 Bhagavatam, where Prabhupada's really inviting everybody to do what they already are doing for Krishna. Here's the excerpt. Quote, "It does not matter what one is, one must dedicate everything in the service of the Lord. If one is a learned scholar, scientist, philosopher, poet, and so forth, then he should employ his learning to establish the supremacy of the Lord. Similarly, if one is a businessman, an industrialist, an agriculturalist, and so forth, then one should spend his hard-earned money for the cause of the Lord. One should try to engage in the service of the Lord everything for which one has specific attraction. And that is the way of peace and prosperity. And that is the remedial measure for all the miseries of material existence." It's really a kind of ghostly existence when we don't have a clue about our mission in the mission. It's a miserable kind of limbo. And as I said, that sense of mission, that does evolve over time. It's not necessarily going to be the same when we're at one stage of life as it is in the next. But that is best discerned with the help of good guides, good mentors. So in this lesson, I've presented clearly, and if you've been listening attentively, we should be able to, by this time, understand and explain the importance of knowing and doing our own duty. And we should know why that can also be difficult in Kali Yuga. We should be able to identify mentors who may help us find our mission in life, and we should be able to identify the responsibilities of prospective guru and prospective disciple. And finally, we should be able to explain how Srila Prabhupada is our foundational master in finding our mission in his mission. Before I take questions and comments, I'm going to just give you a little preview of the next lesson. To love is to cooperate. The transition quote reads, "As we find and develop our mission to help our Founder-Acharya re-spiritualize human society, we'll be better able to develop real love for him. In the next lesson, we'll look at why that intimacy with Srila Prabhupada we hanker for can be so elusive." Okay, Ramananda Prabhu, I'm back in action here.
Yes, everyone is unmuted.
Okay. You're the referee?
Yeah. There was a section in here that you had were like asking introspective questions that the devotee might ask himself in order to figure out where he would best be suited for service. But there were such deep questions, I think that it's difficult to get a lot of value from it just by hearing it once. It needs to be more, well, I don't know. It's so thoughtful that it takes more time to really absorb them.
Right, there are the questions on the screen. Sure, and that's why at every step, whoops, I got to get rid of this message here. Yeah, if we're Bhagavan, if we're fortunate, we'll have good guides. And this is even before the aspiring stage, when there's a mutual examination of prospective guru, prospective disciple. In the beginning, everyone needs basic training, as I said. How to, the whole basic devotional lifestyle. Resting early, rising early, chanting, cooperating with the devotees, just learning what it means to practice regulated devotional service. But as we begin to understand what devotional service is, then at the same time, if we're really lucky, we'll get people who are helping us to encourage us to be thoughtful and introspective. And of course, this never stops. It just continues. That's why in a perfect world, which we don't have, but in a let's say at least in a spiritual culture, the first guru was the mother. And you saw what that mother was doing in the image. She was reading Krishna book to her little infant. So good parents, good teachers, good seniors, good gurus. We're a far cry from that, but that's the target. And it's because we live in such a superficial, distracted society that most people don't even think of these things. It's like, who cares? Just make money and enjoy, right? But as Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. As one British philosopher once noted, most people would rather die than think, because then they might have to change their life. Yeah, if those questions that we're looking at on the screen now are challenging, it's because we live in such a superficial world, and we're not immune from that. If we're not really going deep in bhakti, we're not immune from that at all. We live in more and more an age of distraction. For every new gadget that comes out, it's another distraction, unless it's used in Krishna's service, and instead of we being used by it. So yeah, they're very deep questions, and the point is, at every stage, we need help.
Bala Prabhu has a question, but just if I could just ask this question, just give me a 20-second answer. The middle question, what would I do if I know I had 6 months to live? In this context, finding what your mission is, for myself, if I was knew I was going to die very, very quickly for sure, then I wouldn't do what I necessarily, I would prepare immediately for death,
right,
or something like that. So why is that question there?
Okay, why are all the questions like that? In other words, because we tend to give so many reasons of why we can't do things, even though we might have an aspiration or a desire. These questions are designed to remove blocks, to help us get on with what we could perhaps do more, make a better contribution. What 5 things do I care about most? If I had all the money, it's always about limitations of time, money, facility. We don't have faith that, Krishna would help us. I really would like to do this, but gee, I don't know, Kaviraj Goswami, what is he saying? He's 97 years old, he's half blind, his hand is shaking as he's trying to write the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, and he's saying, You know, I'm lower than the worm and stool, and whoever hears my name loses all pious credits. We remember that, but we tend to forget what he said a few verses later. But I know that by the grace of Varnachananda, I can finish this work. I can accomplish my, as we're saying here, mission in the mission. He has full faith in God. So these questions, yes, of course, in a practical sense, if you knew you had 6 months to live, you would reprioritize and you would do differently. But it's a way of saying, what do we really care about? What do we really want to do? What can we do? How can we do it sooner than later? Because tomorrow often never comes. Tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow. It often never comes. That's the strategy behind the questions, really. And by the way, sure. And by the way, I have to give an acknowledgement here. I Krishnaized, or I adapted questions from some very popular thing going around in the self-help world, which is the biggest section of the bookstores. It's called the passion test. The passion test. What is your passion in life? What are you really? Who are you really? What are you meant to do? You know, this is the perennial hit in the self-help community. So I just took some of their questions and I kind of adapted it for being thoughtful. A devotee is as thoughtful as a non-devotee is speculative. For being thoughtful about who we are in Prabhupada's movement, where we're going, and how we should really try to be all we can be in Prabhupada's mission.
Ballabhadra Prabhu had a question.
Yes, thank you, Hare Krishna. By the way, that was an awesome presentation, Suresvara. Thank you very, very much. There were a lot of things that you said that compel me to, share comments and ask questions, but I realized that's not going to be a reality with the time factor. So I'm just going to throw one question, which is a practical reality in my life. Mm-hmm. I work as a home health care provider, and from time to time, as rare as they are, I'm able to function as a devotee when no one's looking. Because you can't just inject spirituality or religious thinking and talking in this kind of work. It's too invasive for most people in the world. But there are times when people are inquisitive, and I've learned from experience that you can't tell them too much, even if you try to restrict your answers to their questions. I've learned from experience that a lot of times, even though you keep it simple and direct only for the question, that they get turned off, and all of a sudden you have to stop relating to them in terms of their inquisitiveness about your life as a devotee. So, but you also learn to be sensitive to how much they can take, and so you learn to not let your answers get that far. You learn to refine your skills, basically, is what I'm saying. So my question is, do you have any suggestions on or realizations on that kind of situation? Because that's my duty. I can't be a full-time devotee like I used to be right now. My consciousness is not ready to return to that level of reality. So I have to work for a living. So, but I want to still function as a devotee, and those are my realities. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure, that's the challenge of, are you in the Grihastha ashram?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well that's the challenge of especially the Grihastha ashram, which is, the ashram that in a functional, sustainable Krishna culture is the ashram that supports all the other ashrams, because it's the only ashram where people earn. So, like our Founder-Acarya, our foundational spiritual master, he felt the same way. He expressed the same thing you did way back in lesson 4, his mission's roots, when just before Siddhanta Saraswati passed on, he wrote Srila Bhakti Siddhanta from Bombay. I'm a householder. Sometimes I give financial help, but I don't feel like I'm really contributing much. So what should I do? So that was that was a real defining moment in that month in Prabhupada's life, because then Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, if you remember, just reaffirmed what he asked Prabhupada to do when he first met him. I have every hope that you can turn yourself into a very nice English preacher, etc. So that is it's a good struggle. It's a good fight, as they say. Fight the good fight. To do our duty, to maintain ourselves. And what is the Varna for anyway? It's to maintain the ashram. It's to maintain yourself so you do have at least some time to hear and chant about Krishna, even if, as you described in your circumstance, they can't take too much. I must say there are devotees in England. I don't know if I mentioned this in the seminar. These are doctors. Pundarik Prabhu and his wife Hare Krishna Mataji. He's a Brit and she's an Indian Brit, and they're both MDs, and they have their own clinic. And over the years, they've learned how to play the system. In that case, the national health system over there, where it's socialized medicine. And they've learned how to they've devised an alternative therapy that they've convinced the national health system is appropriate in certain cases for their patients. And basically it's an introduction to Krishna consciousness. It's brilliant. It's using a little yoga, a little mantra meditation, a little introspection exercise. So, as you're saying, once in a while, in a blue moon, I remember also when I was supporting my family selling oil paintings, once in a while, either door to door or in the mall, in the store, wherever I happened to be, somebody was inquisitive about my life, and I could, very sensitively and carefully started sharing things. So, I'll end with one way that Prabhupada was sensitive. I don't know if I mentioned this on the seminar. The last morning walk I went with Srila Prabhupada was at Santa Monica Park in June 1976. The day was long. It was June. Early morning walk, beautiful sunny day, and most of us were wearing saffron in those days. It was brahmacharis and sannyasis. Some householders were there, but basically it was a squadron of saffron. We must have been 50, 60 strong, walking through that park at a brisk pace, which is divine grace often kept. And at one point in the walk, I noticed up ahead in the park at that early hour, it must have been 6:15 or something, early for most people, was a little old lady on a park bench. And I started thinking in my mind, my God, what is she thinking? Is she seeing 60 saffron-clad, bald-headed people, wearing these, looks like sheets, coming toward her? And Prabhupada leading the charge. He's walking fast. So we got closer and closer and closer. And then just as we passed by her, Prabhupada, who was leading us, glanced her way and said, "Good morning," in the most charming way. And what did she do? She perked right up. This little old lady looked at Prabhupada and all of us, who must have looked externally like something from another planet. And she just smiled and she said, "Isn't that nice?" She looked favorably upon the devotees, especially His Divine Grace. He was giving her an opportunity to have a favorable impression of devotees. So that was Prabhupada's mercy. He didn't say Hare Krishna. He didn't ignore her. He said something familiar that she could relate to. And at the same time, he knew that she was beholding Vaishnavas. So that was his compassion. That was his intelligence. And he was getting her, that was Agyata Sukriti. right there. She was starting her journey toward Krishna by simply having a favorable impression. So at the very least, we can be ladies and gentlemen, as Prabhupada once answered a reporter. The reporter said, "How do you know who a devotee is?" "Oh, he's a perfect gentleman," Prabhupada said. So I'm sure you comport yourself in that way, Balabhadra Prabhu, and if you can just leave everybody with a favorable impression, that's huge. And as you get that teachable or shareable moment, you can give them a little more. Yeah, that's even all the better.
That instance where that lady had that favorable impression for that moment that Prabhupada was there, is that a classic example of Konya Bhagavan Jiva?
I can't imagine. Yeah. I can't imagine how fortunate that lady is. I mean, I'm sure she's no longer in her, but she was old. I mean, this is a real ancient-looking lady, but nicely dressed, and just having her, moment in the early morning in the park.
I mean, when I look at the Chaitanya Charitamrita and I look at that verse, and Prabhupada takes those first two words, Brahmanda Brahmita, and he gives two long sentences as an explanation for what those two words means. And then he goes to explain Konya Bhagavan Jiva. It really sounds like that's really textbook example, classic textbook material for what the verse is trying to say.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That's how kind of the devotee is very thoughtful and kind, and experienced devotee knows what to do in every circumstance. Prabhupada being on the topmost level of devotional service, he always knew what to say, what to do to help a person, even if it was to scold the person or to ignore the person. It was the best thing for the person. Thank you, Prabhu.
Actually, thank you very much. It was an awesome presentation. I really enjoyed it.
All right, Prabhupada. Anyone else, Ramananda?
I don't think so, and we are about a quarter after.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'll fast forward again, remind everybody. I don't know if you're going to see the same slide, because lessons 8, 9, and 10, this is the part of the seminar, the Prayojana section, which needs the most revision. And I'm really looking, this isn't bad. It gets the point across that all these people, as different as they are and as strong-minded as they are, these leaders, they're all somehow cooperating because the Sinosha, the center of attraction there is Srila Prabhupada. I want to find something better. Let's see if I can do it by next week. And by the way, this lesson coming up next week, I may have shared with you before, this is, I just realized recently, this is the climax of the seminar, even though there's 2 other lessons after this. This is the most intense lesson of the seminar. It's the biggest challenge we face in the Hare Krishna movement. It's cooperating. And His divine grace, identifying with Him, His life, His teaching, mood, and mission is really the key to finding that, what I call now the holy grail of the Hare Krishna movement, is to find that unity in diversity, that cooperative spirit. Okay, thank you, Prabhu. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindubhyeva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha.
Jai Prabhupada.
Jai Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.
Jai, thank you, Suresh Ji. Very nice.
Jai Hare Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.